practicing educators like yourselves today. And so welcome to our session. We are biblically based social emotional character development. And again, I am Joy Roberts, one of the co-founders of Frenzy, here with Whitney Stovall. And we are going to be jumping in and sharing some tools and resources that are going to help you effectively equip and support your students in developing self-management skills. Just a little bit of background on Frenzy. And so if you're not familiar with Frenzy, as I mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders. We actually started in Catholic school at a little Catholic school just down the street from where I live. I actually get to go into that school next week and teach kindergarten, first, second, and I believe third grade. So really passionate about this work of providing scripturally based social emotional character development to really help students develop vital skills. And really the skills come down to, how do I love God? How do I love my neighbor? And so what are the practical skills that students need to work through conflict, to ask for help, to live virtuous lives, and to practice things like patience and fortitude and having courage to continue to persevere even when things are hard. And so that's just a little bit of the backstory on Frenzy. And so we have some amazing free tools and resources that we're going to equip you with today.
Awesome. And I'm Whitney Stovall, as Scott said, and I am the Catholic School Partnership Specialist here at Frenzy. My background is in Catholic education, served as a school counselor in Catholic schools for 10 years in the Diocese of Memphis and at an independent Catholic school with Dominican sisters in Nashville. So now I get to partner with Catholic schools like you, and it's just such a joy to continue this mission together with you. So excited to partner with Joy today and have this awesome conversation.
I have to tell you again, I'm Joy Roberts, Frenzy co-founder. Whitney's a rock star. And so when she said she spent the last 10 years in Catholic schools working with students, she has such real and relevant experience. And the tools that we're introducing you to you today are in part designed and developed by Whitney, counselors, educators, with all of you in mind. So excited to share those tools and resources, and excited that you get to meet Whitney specifically.
Thanks, Joy. Appreciate it. So it's always great to know where we're headed. So today we're obviously just welcoming you and kind of setting the scene for what we're talking about today. We're going to dive into some brain basics today. We're not, getting into too deep of neuropsychology. But we're going to really just dive into just some basics about our brains, how our brains and our emotions are connected, how our brains function when we experience big emotions, and then also some tools and ways that we as educators can respond when we see certain behaviors appear with our students or even, within ourselves. So we're going to dive through that. We're going to share a unit with you all today from Frenzy, which is called I Manage Me, as our webinar is called today, where we're going to walk you through some really explicit teaching that you can share, and it's turnkey, easy to use right away. If you notice your students are in need of some self-management skills, practicing how to manage emotions, you're going to see some great tools in that unit that you can take and use. And then, as Joy just said, we're going to share some really turnkey, easy tools that you can use. So have your phones nearby. We're going to have some QR codes for you to scan, and some free things to take with you.
Yeah. Okay. So on to our purpose. I feel like I've already said this once or twice already, but we are providing scripturally based classroom tools to equip students with really self-management and co-regulation skills. So really excited to jump in and give you the opportunity to look at these tools, consider how you're going to actually take these tools and utilize them in your classroom. So you're going to get resources, and then our hope for today is that you're actually going to walk back into your classroom tomorrow, next week, on Monday, and actually begin to put them into practice to make your jobs easier and the lift a little bit lighter for you.
So let's dive into some brain basics. So we're going to talk just about how really when we think about our brains, God designed them with such intentionality, really where each part of our brain serves such a specific purpose. So our brains help us to think clearly. They help us to reason. They help us to experience emotions. They help us to stay safe if we're encountering danger, right? And I think that that's all intentional. And so I think today, as we talk about managing emotions, our brains play such a big part in this. And so when we experience emotions, I mean, let's be honest, some days we experience a million emotions throughout the day, right? And they don't always stay the same. And so sometimes those emotions might feel really good. You know, they might feel pleasant, like when we feel happy or when we feel excited or loved. But sometimes our emotions, or the emotions our students are experiencing, might feel uncomfortable. They might feel unpleasant. They might feel like we're out of control. So when we think about anger or frustration or jealousy, right, those emotions don't feel as good. But God really gives us emotions. I think that they're tools, they're information that might help us understand better what we need, or maybe if we need to set a boundary and figure out what we don't need. I think emotions are such a powerful tool for us to tune into, so we know how to best respond. I think He gives us the capacity to be able to manage emotions in healthy ways, even those tough ones. And so we want to walk through the different parts of the brain today, so we can better understand that connection between our brain and emotions. And then we're going to, again, look at behaviors and ways that we can respond. And I think as educators, I hope that you walk away from this portion of our time together feeling really affirmed in what you're already doing, because my guess is you're already responding with care and love in your classrooms. But maybe hopefully there might be a little nugget of something that you can take that might be helpful for you if you have big emotions come up in your classroom. So let's go ahead and dive in. So just quick high level, we're going to dive into each of these individually, but we're going to talk about first our survival brain, which is going to be our brain stem. It's that, if you think about how our brain looks, it's going to be this, that part of our brain, that brain stem. This is the part of our brain that's really automatic. It's responsible for, our heart beating, our breathing. It responds automatically when we think that we're in danger. This is that part of our brain that keeps us safe. It's such an important part of our brain. This is the first part of our brain that develops, and it's really the only part of our brain that's really developed when we're 1 and 2 years old. We're going to dive into that emotional part of our brain. This is the part of our brain that's really important for sorting out our emotions, stores all those memories. It's a really important part of our brain when we think about connection and creating that sense of belonging in our classrooms. This part of our brain is where we experience all those emotions. And then finally, our smart brain that we'll talk about a lot today is that part of our brain that functions when we're able to think clearly. This is that part that helps us to really have critical thinking skills, be able to problem solve. And it's that part of our brain we often hear our brain is developing well into our mid-20s, and that smart brain is really that last piece of the puzzle to fully develop as we grow. So many of the students in our classrooms are still very much developing, especially in that smart brain phase.
Well, I can relate to that. My 2 children are 22 and 24, and as young men, their prefrontal cortexes are still developing. I think what's interesting about this conversation is that we're going to unpack this for you as educators first. And in the back half of our conversation, we're going to actually equip you to talk about the brain and equip your students with age-appropriate information on how the brain functions so that they can then apply these in their own lives as well. So right now, this is all about you as educators. The part for your students is going to come next.
Awesome. So let's dive into the survival brain. So again, this is that part of our brain that's responsible for those automatic functions. So when we think about when we're sleeping, we're breathing, our heart's beating, thank goodness. And this is happening without us really thinking about it, right? Our bodies are just doing that. This is the part of our brain if we were to encounter a bear in the woods, right? This is the part that would go into that fight, flight, freeze kind of response. So what you see here, we're going to talk a little bit about when we go into each section, some behaviors you might see. And then on the right, you'll see what are some things that you might be able to do to support your student or anyone in your life who might be functioning in this place of our brain. So things that might show up to really let us know that this part of our brain is activated would be things like loud and angry, outbursts. Maybe students are, hurting themselves. They might be hurting others. Your students might not be able to express with words what's going on. They might be showing it in how they're emoting and the behaviors that they're demonstrating, but as far as being able to express in words, they might be shut down at this point. And so even if they, we know we would love for them to listen to problem solving and try to help, because the honest truth is if students are operating in this survival brain place, it's kind of hard for us. We want to be able to fix that problem. It feels really uncomfortable to see students really struggle here, but they're not really going to be able to listen, to be able to hear those solutions at this point. And so it can be a really tough place for our students to kind of be in. So what are some things that we can do? So we can first soothe them. And so we might want to jump to problem solving, but what we know is that our students aren't going to be able to really jump to that place yet. And so we can soothe them with, gentle messages, things like, I'm here with you. I'm not going anywhere. This looks like this is really hard for you. With calm tone and calm messages, it can be a way to create safety, because when we're experiencing this survival brain place, oftentimes our bodies think that we might be unsafe. And so creating that safe conversation, those gentle messages, can be a really soothing way to support students here.
This is what I think, Whitney, about co-regulation, because I think in these intense moments, I always think of it like a boiling pot. The pot is boiling over and things are really intense and we need things to simmer down. But we have to help the pots, and we need to turn the heat down to get things to simmer. And so when I think about in these intense moments, when I've been in them, part of me wants to mirror the emotions of the student, but actually I need to regulate myself and exhibit what you're talking about, with that calm demeanor, that soothing posture, taking them for a walk, using a neutral voice, patting them on the back, giving them space to help calm that boiling pot down. And that's co-regulation. So what does co-regulation even mean?
Yeah, so it's that idea that if you are calm, I might be able to borrow some of that. And so we have these mirror neurons to connect with one another. And so if you're matching my level, it's likely going to make my pot continue to boil over, right? And so if you're demonstrating calm, it helps me to do the same. It's kind of contagious, right? I love that you mentioned, Joy, the idea of walking, going on a walk, taking a break. As a school counselor at my school in Nashville, I always have to share I was the luckiest person. Our campus was on 83 acres of beautiful land in the middle of Nashville, which is like unheard of at this point. It's like Crane City everywhere in Nashville now. And so when students were in my office and they were stuck and they couldn't get out of this place, and oftentimes the thing that might trigger that survival brain for them at my school was, it might have been a really hard math test that got placed on their desk, and that felt really scary to them. And you would see some of these behaviors come up. If they got stuck, we would go on a walk on that beautiful campus. And sometimes we would try to talk about what was going on, but oftentimes we would talk about something totally different. And we would walk, and it really is this incredible healing tool. Really, I think it's like the only non-medicinal way to really change our body chemistry, where it actually helps to eliminate that stress hormone that's really triggered here. And what I would find is after, a few minutes of walking and fresh air, students could really then move into a better functioning state, where then we could start to reason and problem solve. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Joy.
Yeah, the pot has simmered down.
Yeah.
And I've always found it really helpful in these intense moments. You can't match it with intensity. So it's really good stuff.
Yeah. So then we talk about our emotional brain. So this is that limbic system. Again, it's that part of our brain that's in charge of storing and sorting our emotions and our energy. So things you might see here would be elevated emotions. So maybe that anger, that sadness, that frustration is exaggerated. It's really big. Your students might share what happened to them. Let's say maybe there was an altercation or something that occurred. They're really only able to see the one side, which is their perspective, not able to show much empathy at this point, not able to really take much ownership over it. And I think what we have to remember when we talk about emotional brain and the survival brain is it's not students, making some kind of poor judgment here. They're doing the best they can in the place that they are operating. And so you just might see some big emotions here, and there might be, things talking about like, this is the worst day ever, like those kind of things are going to be what you might hear coming out of your students' mouths at this point.
And really the goal of all of this, as we talk about the emotional brain and as we talk about the survival brain, what we're really trying to get them to do is calm down so that they can actually move into their logical brain, their smart brain, and begin working in that state.
Yeah, and I think as an educator, if your students are operating in that emotional brain, the idea of, again, borrowing your calm, naming those emotions that you see. So being able to say, this seems like this is really hard. I can see you must feel really angry. I understand. And really helping them to feel less alone in those big emotions can be a really powerful way to help, again, move them into that smart brain.
Just being heard, I think, not necessarily fixing the problem, but just helping students feel heard, seen, validate their feelings and emotions are great coping skills that we can provide as educators to come alongside our students.
Absolutely. All right, and then our final one is going to be that smart brain. So this is the frontal lobe. Again, it's that part of our brain that can think clearly, can reason, can use words and logic. This part of our brain is activated when we are not in that fight, flight, or freeze place. And at this point, our students are able, and let's be honest, when we talk about this, I always can think about myself when I'm operating in these places as well. At this point, we're able to then start to think about, what are my choices? How can I, solve this problem? Be able to take other people's perspectives. And so as educators, when we notice that students are in this place, we can then begin to help them problem solve. If they can't think of ideas or solutions, maybe this is a place where we can present some ideas for them. Students are able to respond to redirection at this point. And if we're talking about, what are some next steps for what's occurred, students are going to be able to really think through and process what you're talking about at this point when they might not have been able to before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited when we get into the lesson and the explicit teaching time. We'll actually give you coping skills that you can teach to your students to help them navigate between each of these parts of their brain.
Yeah. And so this is what we've really been talking about, this idea of neuroplasticity, and that we can borrow calm, this idea of co-regulation. And so this slide is really a celebration of you, that you as the educator are really, you can be that supportive and caring adult in that time when students are experiencing big emotions. That we really have the opportunity to really change the trajectory here to help students. If they're approaching what might be a negative outcome based on those emotions, we can help them to use the coping skills that we're going to talk about and really find that place back to their smart brain. And so you're doing amazing work as educators, and just know that you play a big part in this. So celebrating you for sure.
Yep, this is really good stuff. So we're going to look at an actual unit. And so it's called I Manage Me. And this is really going to strengthen the mental health of your students. It's going to provide coping skills, coping tools. I'm going to give you just a second to scan that QR code so that you can open up this link and follow along with me. I'm going to walk you through this unit, kind of cast vision for how it's designed and created to be used. And then you're going to have this resource in your back pocket. And so Whitney, do you want me to share my screen?
I have it, and I think I opened up I'm sorry, I had it in a different window, and I moved it all to the same one. So sorry, y'all, you're gonna have to see me scroll down for a sec.
So this unit, let me give you some background context. It's designed to teach explicit skills one time a week. Okay, so how many times? One time a week. And so in this unit, you're going to find 6 different ways to teach on this big idea, I manage me. And so we're going to be unpacking this catchphrase. The catchphrase, I manage me, is what your students will hopefully catch on to. Hopefully you hear them say it in the classroom or in the middle of a conflict or walking down the hallways or out on the blacktop. But this is really a catchphrase. They may not quote the key verses. And so this catchphrase is actually rooted in scripture. And so we're looking at 2 Timothy 1:7 and a passage in Proverbs. And so we're helping unpack these big concepts and ideas through the lens of scripture. And so really when we think about what we're teaching here, we're teaching how to live our faith out in action. It's religion or faith in action. And so if you were teaching this on a regular frenzy type schedule, you'd be teaching it one time a week. And for a whole month, you're going to focus on helping students recognize their emotions and gain tools to actually help them manage those emotions and those responses. So, okay, that's the big idea. Let's get into the nitty gritty and the practical. So as you're scrolling through here, what you're seeing is a lesson. So it's anchored in the two passages of scripture. You're going to have an ask and discuss. And this is where you get to unpack smart brain, emotional brain, and survival brain. So to help students understand how God designed their brains, how they're functioning, and what kind of responses get triggered. And so on the bottom of page 4, you saw Whitney talking about this idea of fight, flight, or freeze. And so you're going to help students begin to recognize what part of their brain they're working in when they're yelling, when they're screaming, when they're throwing things, or when they are trying to run to their room, or they're trying to avoid people. That's their flight response. Or if they're having a hard time getting stuck and not being able to talk or express emotions and feelings, they're likely in a freeze response. So again, helping normalize the conversation around how their responses are actually connected to how they're functioning in their brain.
And I think too, Joy, I think that that's such helpful information for kids. I think it's empowering to begin to understand, like, oh, this now makes sense, right? And so when they're in that smart brain and you're teaching them what this looks like, they're able to have that better self-awareness that they might not have had before. I think it's really empowering.
And on that note, Whit, you brought up real, relatable, and relevant sharing. And so we as educators get to share bits and pieces of our own life. And so you'll notice in our first 2 lessons, we have a prompt called real, relatable, and relevant sharing. And so we actually prompt you to share something relevant on this topic. And so right here you see, share about a time when your smart brain temporarily shut down and how you went into fight, flight, or freeze response. And then talk about how you were able to get your smart brain back online. And so when you're going through this first lesson, it ends with giving you 3 primary key teaching points. And so this kind of summarizes what you're teaching in this unit to your students. And again, this is designed for pre-K through 8th grade. So there's some scaling that you'll do. If you are an early elementary 3 through 5-year-old teacher, let us know. We actually have an early education packet that is scaled for our youngest students that we can hand off to you. But what you're really teaching is how students can manage emotions. So once they can identify that they're angry, they're anxious, or they're scared, you're going to help them mitigate or identify how to respond. So how do they calm their body down? So deep breathing, push-ups, go for a little jog, take a shower, get a drink of water. When your brain just keeps going and you keep locking in on negative thoughts or negative ideas, what can we do? Well, coloring and doodling are amazing tools that you can have in your back pocket as a teacher to help students be able to calm their brain. We're actually encouraging here that you use 2 Timothy 1:7 so that students can focus on some scripture memorization. And then last but not least, how do we keep our smart brain turned on? Drawing, writing down emotions with journaling, talking to a caring adult. These are all things that we can help our students do in those intense times when the pot has boiled over. Okay, the next is an object lesson. And so this lesson is designed to really help students identify emotions. And so when you think about it, if we can't name our emotions, we can't tame our emotions. So it's this idea, you got to name it to tame it. And so this is an object lesson. So this is intended to engage the kinesthetic learners. And so this is an opportunity to gather supplies like stuffed animals, bristles, feathers, sandpaper. I'm actually doing this in a class tomorrow with students. And this is going to help them tactilely be able to identify what they're feeling with what they're feeling inside with what they're feeling with their hands. And so again, the goal at the end of this is to help them identify emotions so that they can name it, to tame it, and then begin to utilize those coping tools and skills.
Yeah, I think if you are using this unit, it's helpful to know that the red text is things that you will do as you're teaching it, and then your blue text is going to walk you through how to facilitate that conversation. So it's all really easy and well scripted out for you to use with your students. I think too that this lesson is really helpful for students to recognize that how emotions feel within themselves too, Joy, because I think oftentimes our bodies might show up with those emotions before we can actually connect with what we're feeling. And so making those connections here, I think will serve students really well down the line as they're, better managing emotions.
On this lesson, when you're looking at it, if you have older systems or older students working with younger students, buddy systems, this would be amazing to have the 8th graders come and teach the 1st grade classroom, because it is scripted, it is active, it is laid out, or have a guest speaker come in and present on this topic if you want to integrate other voices into your classroom. Next on the list, we're going to see group questions. I like this as a way to continue the conversation. So you've just had these explicit teaching times that we just went through with you. You can follow that up the next day with a group question. You put one question on the board, you break students into small groups, or you have a large group conversation. But what you're really doing is you're teaching explicit skills. And then with group questions, you're allowing students to create space to process. How do I use this? How do I apply it in my life? You'll notice here on question 4, we're giving scenarios and creating space for students to identify what is the best response. So again, we're creating room for them to engage their imagination and project forward what is the kind of response they want to make in a situation. And so these scenario-based questions are really effective for helping students think in advance before they're angry. So these are non-boiling moments where they can actually engage their logical brain, their smart brain, and consider what are the choices that they want to make when emotions get big.
Yeah, I love that, Joy. And I think when we think back to the survival and the emotional brain, what happens a lot of times is you're not in a place to be able to think of these solutions. It's kind of like flexing a muscle, building that coping skills toolbox. And so I think for students to have that opportunity to practice these ahead of time, it sets them up for success later.
Mm-hmm. And notice on the bottom, more mature material. So if you are have middle school students, these questions are designed with them in mind, often engaging social media and other components that are really relevant for our older students. Okay, as we jump in, this is an activity. So this can be, often our schools put it in homeroom one time a week, or they place it in religion one time a week because of the scriptural integration, which we didn't fully highlight, but we'll continue to look at. This could also be picked up by your art teachers. So if you have an art teacher at your school, they love getting their hands on these lessons. So if you think about teaching this for a whole month, you've got 6 ways to teach it. And you're going to use 4 in your classroom, which will leave, if you're good at your math, you'll leave you 2 left over. And so 2 of these you could give, like this one, to your art teacher. This is where students are actually going to get to build and create their own emojis. Again, emotion recognition. That is the foundation of emotional intelligence. When we teach students to identify and recognize emotions, it is from that place that they can self-manage and develop coping skills to actually manage those emotions. So as we move on, we have a game. It's called Paul and Timothy, St. Paul and St. Timothy. And this is a very active game. So if you have a PE teacher, they may want to pick this up in PE. I've seen this done. I've done this inside the context of a regular classroom structure and setting. It again is engaging, allows students to have movement. It is play-based. It starts a conversation and actually allows them to use their bodies to begin to process and think through these big ideas of how their brains works and how to respond when big emotions come up. And then last but not least, we are going to look at, we've unpacked in the lesson, 2 Timothy and Proverbs. Now we're going to take a closer look at James 1:19. And so this is where we're to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And so what we do here in this passage is we unpack the context of the scripture, and then we help students consider some really key points and ideas. So you'll see, what does it mean to be quick to listen? It creates room for them to discuss how to apply this verse in their lives when they feel angry. You'll notice on the bottom of page 15, it talks about mirroring emotions. And so Whitney talked about that at the start of our session. And so here's some additional context for you to consider on how mirroring emotions work in our students. And then what I love about each of our lessons, they always end in conversation. And so this is where students get to learn about each other, they get to learn from each other, and that's where they begin to put themselves into the information and into the stories that are being taught so that they can process through how to live it out in their own personal lives.
So if you need, again, to scan that QR code, we want to make sure you have a chance to get that. So if you scan this code, it'll take you to that unit and you can download that and use it right away with your students. And as you think about this, you might think about how could teaching these explicit skills really support your students in the learning environment. So we always love to kind of have that opportunity for us to reflect and see how could this support our students. So now we want to move on to some everyday tools. So we've kind of walked through kind of how our brain functions. We've given you some explicit lessons to teach your students. Now we're going to give you some really short, easy to use everyday tools that you can use in your classrooms that are really going to help strengthen the mental health of your students. So again, have your phones nearby if you want to check out these QR codes. So you can scan this code here, and what it will do, and again, I apologize, y'all, I had it pulled up and then I switched windows. It will take you to a landing page where you can access, where you can print out these different daily check-in tools. We're going to show you a video in a second that you can see this used in action, but this will actually walk you through exactly how to use this. This is really foundational for helping students to build that emotional intelligence. Again, talking all about what we've talked about, managing our emotions before they manage us. And so when you get into this landing page, you'll even see some great ways. I know, Joy, you talked about this, we don't have to fix the emotion. We can just acknowledge it when students share. So as you access these tools, there's some great tips here on ways that we can respond with open-ended questions. Is there something today that's been hard for you? Using those I statements and just validating students' feelings can be a really great way for students to feel less alone, especially if they're feeling those big feelings.
One thing I would say is, as you're considering, as you sign off from this webinar, what do you want to do first? Like, we're going to give you a whole bunch of resources, but just thinking strategically, I would say, and again, we're going to walk through this tool in detail, I would encourage you to consider how you would use this tool in your classroom, because this is like baseline 101. And if students can get this skill right, it is the building blocks and foundations for the other skills. And so as Whitney goes through this, I really want to challenge you to think, how could you put this into practice in your classroom this week?
Yeah, so you'll see that these are kind of, there's different versions of these that are really scaled to meet our age groups of our students. So for our youngest learners, they can use, and on that landing page, you'll see there's my trash can truck is outside. If it's loud, I'm sorry. It's that day of the week. But you'll see where you can print these out and students can have them, as a desktop size or displayed on your boards or in your room. It's a great way for students to check in. I also think it's really helpful information for us as educators. If our students walk into their classrooms feeling angry or frustrated, we can express a little more empathy and understanding and try to help, again, use those tools we talked about earlier. How can we respond? So great ways for students to set them up for success in the classroom. Those kind of more middle elementary age students, we expand that vocabulary. I think it's great for us to be able to kind of be more specific in our emotions. It can help us even, when we feel angry versus out of control, those two, how we respond to those two emotions might look different. And so helping students as they grow to build that emotional vocabulary is really powerful. And again, you'll see more expanded vocabulary for our more middle school age students, junior high. I also think this is a great tool to use amongst faculty to be able to check in with and for each other. When we also are experiencing a lot of emotions ourselves, can be a great tool to maybe share at a faculty meeting.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm excited for you to see the video and to, again, brainstorm, how are you going to put it into practice next week?
Yeah.
One of the most useful offerings at Frenzy is our daily check-in tool. It creates a space for students to practice self-awareness through identifying their emotions.
Okay, are you ready, friends? All right, show me how you're feeling today, please. Show me how you're feeling. Okay, you can put yours down. I am feeling happy today. Remember how I was sick last week? I got rid of it over the weekend, so I'm feeling happy about that.
Students need to see the adults in their lives identify and acknowledge their own emotions in a way that is healthy and productive. Teachers, you have the capacity to lead and model positive emotional expression and management.
I am feeling calm today. I feel ready for the week. But earlier I wasn't calm. Do you want to know why? Because I remembered that I had to decorate the door. So I had to do that this morning. And I was doing it like crazy. Please show me if you would like to share. Colton, go ahead.
I'm happy because I haven't been. I'm sad because I haven't been here in a while, and I haven't been feeling good. And I'm happy because I'm back at school.
Thank you, Colton.
We know that students who are stressed, worried, sad, lonely, or upset are students that can't learn at their fullest capacity. All of us have times of experiencing strong emotions, and when we do, our ability to concentrate, problem solve, and self-regulate is impaired.
But it was fun. Yeah, I'm glad you had a good day yesterday. Maisie.
When teachers acknowledge their students' emotions, it demonstrates care and concern for that student. Students feel seen and known.
Oh, I'm sorry you're tired.
The Frenzy Daily Check-in tool doesn't take a huge amount of time. This brief daily exercise can make a big difference in your students' overall well-being. When you talk about emotions every day, you are increasing every student's emotional literacy. This will lead to greater academic success and coping skills. Are you ready to transform your classroom? Access the Frenzy Daily Check-in tools at frenzy.co today.
Awesome. I love seeing that in action.
One of the most useful
One of the things I do want to highlight and share is when you are on the landing page, and one of the ways you can use this is in the Google form. What you saw there was where she had it printed out in the desktop size. I had the best conversation with a counselor at a Catholic school in Houston where she used the Google form with her middle school. She served 5th through 8th grade students, and she said she had them on Mondays use that daily check-in tool. And she said it was just such helpful information. Many students who weren't really on her radar that might have had big emotions that she needed to check in with it became obvious that it might be someone for her to check in with. And so it was just helpful information for her. And so you'll see there's multiple formats in which you can use these. And so we'd love to hear if you use these, how they're positively impacting your classroom. So just like you saw in the video, that desk format's going to be right there.
And you saw a poster too hanging on her wall. One of the things I want to highlight from that video is that this particular teacher, this was a second grade class, had been using this daily check-in for 4 or 5 months. And so she had built the rhythm and habit of having a daily check-in. And so when we went in and I got to observe this in motion, the teacher said the word marshmallow. All the students got up and they sat down in their designated spaces and they pulled out their daily check-in card, and she facilitated the questions. And I think that took a total of 6 minutes. And what she and her other teachers described in utilizing this tool is it helped de-escalate the classroom. It helped students not only recognize their own emotions, but it actually taught them empathy and compassion for other students. One of the boys in that class was talking about this jump rope contest that he was going to have at lunch, and he was really nervous about it. And then after everybody had separated, I saw kids going over to him and patting him on the back and cheering him on and encouraging. And so being able to recognize the emotions of others is a really helpful tool. And again, creating a classroom climate and culture of compassion, kindness, empathy, an ability to perspective take and think how other people might be feeling is a really foundational life skill that we get to teach and equip students with.
Love that. I always love that story, Joy. So we've talked about this foundational skill of emotion recognition. We're going to now share a couple tools that are really help students to be self-managers, problem solvers. So once they have this foundation, it's a great way to introduce a couple new tools for students as they, build that emotional vocabulary. So what you see here, again, there's a QR code that will take you to where you can print out this weather chart here on the left. So feel free to scan that as we kind of walk through what this is. This is really inspired by a tool that I used almost daily in my class, in my office as a school counselor. I use this with my 3-year-olds all the way up through my 8th grade students, and I can't tell you how well it worked for all of them. So this is really based on this idea of being solution focused. So when students are experiencing big emotions, maybe something happened that was really embarrassing and they feel like really stuck in that emotion, or maybe students are having, a problem at home that they come to school carrying with them. And so it's going to help students to really identify their problem, really be able to practice self-regulation, be their own problem solvers. I also think this tool gives great hope for students. As we see here, it's a number line that doesn't really have an end, right? It goes back and forth. And so I've always used weather as a great example. So when students are experiencing big emotions, we can talk to them about what's the worst weather you can imagine. I live in the Southeast and we've been experiencing horrible tornadoes lately. So often students would recognize a tornado is pretty terrible. Then we would talk about the other end of the spectrum where we would talk about sunny days are really the total opposite of that. But in between, there's a lot of different weather. And even within one day, we might have a variety of weather that occurs. I think talking about that gives us hope that it's not going to stay the same. So if we're experiencing that tornado or that really stormy moment, we can invite students to actually rate their big emotion or their problem. What number would you say this problem is? And they might say, this feels like a 6. And what we can do is be like, man, that must feel really big. That must not feel really good. And then we can invite students, once they've got some coping skills like breathing, we'll share a couple in a moment, they can pick a coping skill and maybe try to work towards getting back towards that 1 or that 2.
I love that idea of helping students realize that they're not going to get stuck there. So just because they're a 6 right now, it doesn't mean in 10 minutes or tomorrow that they're going to still be stuck in a 6, but really see how emotions can blow in and blow out. They roll in, roll out. The pot can boil over and it can simmer down. One of the things there's something I wanted to share about this that was that I was super excited about, and it's totally just.
It'll come back in a moment.
Oh, I know, like your hope, Whitney. You were talking about hope, and I think as Catholic schools, one of the things that we get to anchor our students in is that God is in control, and that He is the one that gives us hope in the midst of our circumstances. And I think of that passage in Isaiah 40 where it says, "Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They'll run and not grow weary, walk and not grow faint, and rise on the wings of eagles," and all that good stuff. But just in our ability and capacity to broker hope to students in the midst of big emotions, I think is something that we get to do as Catholic educators.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for students just to have that idea, it helps them to regain a sense of control when things feel out of control, which I think builds confidence, it builds self-efficacy skills. And so this tool is really powerful. If you print it off, you'll notice it's kind of in a bookmark size. I would often let students take a paper clip and put it up on there, and they could slide it throughout the day if that's a helpful tool for students to practice self-regulation. So if you ever have any questions about this tool, I would always love to chat with you, and I'll be sure you get my contact information at the end.
Whitney, I have a question as we kind of wrap up looking at this tool. Can we brainstorm, how would a classroom teacher put this into practice? Would they use it one-on-one? Would they use it at the classroom as a whole? Like, maybe describe those scenarios of what, practically speaking, this would look like in the context of a classroom.
Yeah, so I think the best way to introduce this tool is when your class is showing that they're operating in that smart brain. We've got a self-regulated class, right? And then you can just ask them to share, what are some big problems you've experienced? What happens when you feel angry? What kind of things come up? And so you can kind of present different emotions, ask them to share problems, and just kind of start the conversation there. And then I would usually frame it with, let's talk about weather, and let's talk about what's the worst weather. Let's talk about what's the best weather, and just kind of frame the conversation there. And then once you have, I would think we're going to talk about a breathing exercise in a moment, but I think what you could do here is talk about when you feel those big emotions, what are some things that help? So you might make a list, and they might say, talking to my mom, talking to my teacher, or the counselor, using a fidget toy, doing push-ups, going for a walk, taking a break, all those kind of coping skills. They can build that toolbox, and then we can say, okay, so if we're experiencing a 6 or a 7 kind of problem, what might be something that could bring you down to a 4 or 5, and you just kind of inch your way down. And so really just framing the conversation with, we can rank kind of how our problems or emotions fall on this line, and then what are tools we can use to help bring us back to a place where if students need a break, then they feel ready to go back to the classroom. And it might not be a 1 that gets us back to the classroom, but if students can recognize, hey, if I get to a 3, that might feel like a place I'm ready to go back to the classroom. So that's the way I would see it used. I've seen it used where I shared this tool with teachers at my school, and if individual students who maybe experience big emotions often, give them that paper clip and let them use that to kind of help manage their own emotions as a visual for them. But maybe if your classroom has a really rough recess and they come inside and we've got conflicts and we need to kind of, settle back into a place of regulation before we get back to math class, you can pull this out with your whole class and facilitate conversation, and as a group come up with ways to resolve the conflict. So I can see it working both.
Yeah, so you could do it one-on-one if you're one of those teachers that meets with your students one-on-one. This would be an amazing conversation starter that gives you a framework to enter into that conversation and really do a pulse check with where your student is at. And then, as Whitney described, as a whole class conversation, create a unified language so that students can help each other co-regulate and to help each other navigate the storms of our emotions. This is really good stuff. I hope you're beginning to consider what tools you can actually pull out of your back pocket next week and put into play, the weather chart being one of them.
Before I want one more thing I want to add to this too. I know you talked a little bit about empathy and compassion earlier, Joy, and I think this tool also does a great job for that, where we can recognize what might be a 6 or a 7 problem for you in my class. That might not be a 6 or a 7 problem for me. I might be able to handle that situation, and it doesn't affect me as much. And so I think we're also able to recognize how we can be, show empathy and understanding of others, and that what might trigger somebody else might not be the thing that triggers me, which helps us just continue to show care. So as we talk about coping skills, breathing is really a powerful tool. We always hear, take a deep breath, right? And sometimes we might, roll our eyes and not want to do it. But when we think about really what happens when we think of science in our bodies, when we take deep breaths, it actually sends, I would tell students, it sends feel good messages to our brains that help our brains tell our, send a message to the rest of our bodies to calm so we can get that smart rate back online. Here's 2 examples of breathing exercises with a visual that students can trace the rainbow, take a deep breath as they move from dot to dot. And you'll notice the little calm face in the middle. The deep mountain breathing, which I know Joy and I are big mountain lovers and love to be outside. So I in particular love this one, where students can trace this visual here. I would often also have students, empower them to use just a figure 8 on their leg. If they were nervous before a math test, trace that figure 8 on their leg underneath their desk. And it doesn't take anything. It's just something that they have, and that their breath is really always with them. And I would say that's really like a superpower that you can access. And so when you experience those big emotions, use that tool. But I think it's important as a whole class, you can share these tools again at times of self-regulation in your classroom, build that muscle. So when the big emotions come, they've practiced it, and it's more like, pulling out an old friend when they have that big emotion.
So really we're talking about habits that cultivate students' ability to cope, self-manage, and really create co-regulation in your classroom.
Yeah.
So as we've given you a whole host of tools, we hope that you use them, that you put them into practice. Whitney and I are passionate about supporting you as educators. Your feedback means a whole lot to us. So if you have your phones and would take just 2 minutes to fill out this QR, or take this QR code, give us some input, give us some feedback. We take it very seriously. It helps us shape our conversations to make sure that it is real and relevant for you all. So thanks for taking just a few moments to complete that.
All right. And then I'm going to just quickly share here. You'll see my email here at the bottom, whitney@frenzy.co. As we've gone through the iManage Me unit and all of these tools here at the end, if you have any interest in signing up for a coaching session where you and I can connect and I can, further dive into these materials with you, explain anything in more detail, or help you figure out how it might work within the context of your classroom or in your school building, please feel free to scan this. It'll take you to a Google form, and I'll be on the lookout for any of you if you have any interest in connecting.
Yeah, you all are amazing. As educators, you are literally changing the world. You're changing the trajectory of students' lives. So thank you for taking the time to invest in building and cultivating your own skills. We hope that you are blessed with some additional new resources that you can put in your back pocket. And I'm going to say it again, and use next week. So thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you.
Yes, and happy Easter, everyone.
And thank you, Scott and NCEA. Love NCEA. It is an honor and a privilege to partner with NCEA. So thank you, Scott.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you. And we're so looking forward to seeing you and hearing the keynote at NCEA 2023, which is happening just in a few days here, April 11th through the 13th. And if you want more information about that, you can go to ncea.org/webinars. And that's actually the link for the webinars that we have coming up. But the link for the convention is ncea.org/NCEA 2023. We look forward to seeing your whole team there, Joy and Whitney, and it's just going to be a really great week. So I hope that as many people can join us there as possible.
Thank you.
See you soon.
You can't wait. So excited. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.